I unintentionally had an affair shortly after our first child was born, and I've never been so scared of losing something in my life. I'm concerned that my fiancé might end our relationship, and I fully acknowledge that it's my fault. It was a mistake, and I can genuinely swear that it was, even if it might sound foolish. I'm seeking advice on what steps to take before I potentially make any more wrong decisions that could jeopardize everything. My fiancé, who is 30 years old, and I, at 28 years old, welcomed our baby daughter into the world 5 months ago, and it was an incredibly joyful moment in our lives. His love for me grew even stronger after our child's birth. Everything appeared perfect. But my regrettable choices now have me fearing that I might lose it all. I met my fiancé almost 10 years ago, right around the time I turned 18. My parents were exceptionally strict and seldom allowed me to attend or host parties. I had a typical upbringing with my parents and 2 sisters. Since I was a child, I eagerly anticipated my 18th birthday because I knew it would grant me a bit of freedom. I had a friend named Anna who had a much more relaxed upbringing as an only child. She promised to throw a birthday party for me at her house. After some convincing, my parents agreed to let me go, but with the condition that I brought my older sister along. Anna helped me get ready, even lending me her best dress. The party was unlike anything I'd ever experienced, but something else caught my attention: Chris. Chris became the focal point of attention at my own birthday celebration. I found him incredibly self-assured and attractive, and it seemed others felt the same way. I was too shy to approach him, but Anna didn't share my hesitation. After talking to Chris, Anna confessed to having a crush on him, which surprised me since she wasn't someone who developed crushes quickly. Chris had a unique blend of charm and a hint of arrogance that drew Anna to him. 2 weeks later, I bumped into Chris at the grocery store. He remembered me as the birthday girl, and we struck up a conversation. I was initially very reserved because I had limited experience with boys, but Chris was warm and friendly, making it much easier to connect. Eventually, Anna, Chris, and I formed a close trio and began doing nearly everything together. I had feelings for Chris, but I pushed them aside because Anna had already confessed her attraction to him. A year later, Chris and Anna began dating, so I decided to give them space and not be a third wheel. They dated for another year, but then something happened. Anna confided in me that she had gotten drunk at a party and cheated on Chris. I kept her secret from him, but unfortunately, Anna continued to cheat on him multiple times. Eventually, Chris discovered her infidelity, and they broke up. Anna blamed me for their breakup and accused me of betraying her secret. I tried to explain that I hadn't told him, but she didn't believe me, and that marked the end of our friendship. Anna moved away with her parents, and Chris went to New York to study law. I also got into college shortly after these events. Several years later, I graduated from college and moved to New York for work. By chance, I crossed paths with Chris when he visited the boutique where I worked. It was a shock for both of us, and we spent hours catching up and discussing life. It felt like a dream to see my old crush again. I couldn't believe it. I learned that Chris had become a successful lawyer at a prestigious firm, I won't mention the name for privacy reasons, and was making a 6-figure monthly income. Chris came from a wealthy family, and his parents were well-known figures. I worked as a fashion designer in a luxury boutique, which I won't name, and Chris frequently visited me. Months passed, and our friendship rekindled. After a year of flirting, Chris asked me out, and I gladly accepted. Our relationship grew increasingly serious, and we couldn't bear to spend a day apart. Chris's female colleagues envied me because he proudly brought me to his workplace. Life was going well, and I was living the life I had always envisioned on my birthday. A few months later, Chris surprised me with a generous gift of $500,000. I was incredibly grateful because it provided more than enough capital for me to start my own boutique. 1 year later, my boutique was thriving, and I had the resources to establish 5 more. Chris received a promotion, and together we earned more than enough to sustain ourselves. After his promotion, Chris proposed to me, and I joyfully accepted. I was so excited that I didn't hesitate to share the news on my Instagram account. Months later, Chris purchased a house and invited me to move in with him. My parents initially wanted us to marry first, but I convinced them otherwise. I envisioned a perfect wedding with Chris, and I didn't want to rush into it. By that time, I had already met Chris's parents, who were kind but shared the traditional belief that we should marry before living together. Chris mentioned that his family was quite traditional, much like mine, and they held strict values. After persistent discussions, his parents eventually agreed to our decision to live together. Life with Chris was exceptional, and I fell more deeply in love with him every day. He was caring, exceptionally generous, and incredibly loving. I felt like the most cherished woman in the world. Even during disagreements, Chris never raised his voice or responded with anger. He remained composed and willing to listen to me. Chris also took excellent care of me when I was unwell, sometimes even missing work to be with me. I treasured every moment with him, often doubting whether I truly deserved such a wonderful partner. Several months later, we decided to start a family. After weeks of trying, I became pregnant, which brought immense joy to Chris. I could see the excitement in his eyes when I shared the news. He became incredibly attentive and protective during my stress-free pregnancy, which was a beautiful experience. When our daughter was born, Chris's love for me multiplied. Despite my insecurities about my postpartum body, he actively supported me in regaining my confidence. Our daughter added even more happiness to our already content life, enhancing it significantly. I posted a series of pictures and videos featuring Chris, our daughter, and me in a joint Instagram post. At the time, I only had around 1,000 followers on Instagram, and I didn't anticipate the level of engagement those posts received. While Chris was relatively popular, I didn't expect people to take such a keen interest in our personal lives. If only I hadn't made those posts, I wouldn't be in the predicament I am now. 3 months after our daughter's birth, Chris embarked on a 3-week work trip to Italy. It was challenging for me to part with him for such an extended period, but he had work commitments. Chris had already taken time off after our daughter's birth, so this trip was essential. The first week without him felt depressing and monotonous. I attempted to focus on my work and our daughter, but nothing seemed to genuinely excite me. I anticipated that it would be challenging, but the level of depression I experienced was unexpected. Chris had spoiled me with his constant presence to the point where I had grown accustomed to it. Prior to his work trip, the longest period we had spent apart was 3 days. While Chris called me daily, it simply didn't suffice. I longed for every aspect of him, and even though it had only been a week, it felt like a month had passed. One day, my personal assistant noticed my downcast mood and invited me to a party. I wasn't accustomed to partying, but she assured me that it would provide a welcome distraction. I discussed it with Chris, and he encouraged me to go, concerned about my tired appearance during our video calls. I dropped off our daughter at his mother's house before attending the party. That evening, I wore a modest black evening gown with no intention of seeking a new partner since I was already extremely proud of Chris. I limited myself to just 1 drink at the party, determined not to get intoxicated. After 2 hours, I was eager to return home and spend time with my daughter. As I was leaving, I encountered a man named Roy, who was nearly as tall as Chris and bore a striking resemblance to him. I had to take a second look to spot the subtle differences, primarily in the eyes and facial features. Chris was also more muscular than Roy. To my surprise, Roy offered to buy me a drink after introducing himself. I initially declined politely, but he insisted. I was uncomfortable with the idea of a stranger buying me a drink, so I attempted to walk away. However, Roy said something that halted me in my tracks. He mentioned that he was a friend of Chris and that Chris had asked him to keep me company. I found this peculiar because Chris had never introduced me to Roy before, but Roy explained that he didn't reside in New York. He even shared some details about Chris, which I believed because Chris was selective about the people he interacted with. Roy bought me a drink, and I made the regrettable decision to consume it. After another drink, I began to feel dizzy and developed a headache. I informed Roy that I wanted to go home, and he offered to drive me. I drifted off to sleep in the car and only woke up when Roy tapped me gently. He informed me that we had already arrived home. He helped me out of the car, but I soon realized we were not at my home. I inquired about our location, and Roy explained that his car had broken down, making it impossible to drive any further. I suggested taking a cab to get back to my daughter, but Roy insisted it was too late for a cab. After some consideration, I reluctantly agreed, feeling tired and weak. Roy led me into what turned out to be his house. I asked him for painkillers for my headache, but he offered me hot milk instead, which provided some relief. Roy showed me the room where I would be sleeping, and I thanked him before closing the door. Feeling comfortable because I believed he was a friend of Chris, I attempted to call Chris, but my phone was dead. Wanting to take a shower, I realized I had no clothes to change into, so I lay down on the bed trying to rest. Sometime during the night, Roy knocked on my door. I opened it to find him standing there, clad only in a towel, completely shirtless with wet hair. Strangely, he had styled his hair similarly to Chris. While he already bore a striking resemblance to Chris, now the resemblance seemed even more pronounced. I asked him what he needed, and he explained that he was searching for his shirt. After retrieving his shirt, he noticed that I hadn't taken a shower and offered me his shirt, insisting that I put it on. Feeling somewhat dizzy, I decided to take a hot bath. While I was in the bath, Roy entered the bathroom completely unclothed. I was too stunned to utter a word and too fatigued to move. He simply stood there silently, watching me for an extended period. I eventually snapped out of my trance and demanded that he leave. My thoughts raced to Chris and how he would react if he knew I had seen his friend unclothed. Roy ignored my request and proceeded to look at me. I was bewildered as I was intoxicated, and witnessing his actions felt both wrong and strangely arousing. It didn't help that I had been sexually frustrated for over 3 weeks given Chris's busy schedule in the 2 weeks leading up to his trip. I succumbed to temptation, and before I knew it, I found myself engaging in self-touch. I knew it was wrong and I shouldn't have done it, but once I started, I couldn't stop. What made it worse was that Roy bore a striking resemblance to Chris, almost like I was looking at my husband. Things escalated quickly and Roy joined me in the tub, and we had physical closeness. The following morning, waking up next to a stranger, I realized I had committed a grave mistake, the biggest of my life. My head throbbed with a painful sensation that went beyond a mere hangover. I discovered that Roy had spiked my drink with some sort of medication. Shockingly, Roy confessed that he had been hired by someone to make me cheat on my husband. Claiming that his job was now complete, he left me alone in the house. While I had given consent, I knew I had done so under the influence of the pills. Yes, he left me alone. This man gave pills to me and then disappeared. I had cheated on my husband, believing I was with him due to the pills' effects, which accentuated the similarities between them. Upon returning home, I felt like a cheat, unable to even look at my daughter because of the overwhelming guilt. Chris had treated me like royalty, and I had shattered his trust. I shouldn't have gone to the party in the first place. I hadn't even had the chance to contemplate who had hired Roy. I was too consumed by my own depression. It's been a week since I cheated on my husband, and it's still a week until he returns home. I'm at a loss for what to do. I've been avoiding all his calls because I lack the courage to hear his voice. Facing him in a week's time feels daunting. I've shared my story, and I urgently need your advice. It was an accident, but I still cheated. Should I confess the truth or tell a lie? I can't live with myself like this. I'm overwhelmed by guilt. Please give me some guidance, I feel so powerless. **update****. Hi everyone, it's been 5 months and I wanted to share how things have been going. Some of you in the comments called me a fool, and honestly, I deserved it. As soon as Chris returned, I followed most of your advice and confessed the truth. I had never seen such disappointment and pain in his eyes before. He stared at me in silence for what felt like an eternity. It seems like I had lost all his respect. After a while, he quietly retreated to his study, locking the door for hours. It was the most agonizing time of my life. I cried my heart out, but I refrained from knocking on the door. It would have been selfish of me. He had every right to be angry, so I gave him space. I was prepared to accept whatever decision he made, even if it meant him leaving me. I had brought shame upon myself, and I knew I had been naive. 2 days later, Chris forwarded a message to me. The message contained pictures of me leaving the party with Roy, and it detailed what had happened that night. Chris, being a lawyer, enlisted the help of his friends to trace the message back to Anna. Yes, Anna. She had hired Roy with the intention of sabotaging our relationship. I was furious, and with Chris's assistance, we located Roy. When we threatened to involve the authorities, he led us to Anna. During our confrontation, Anna accused me of taking Chris away from her because I had told him about her past infidelity years ago. She believed this was her way of getting back at me. Roy had turned off my phone, and Anna had provided him with personal details about Chris to make her scheme more convincing. Apparently, she had seen all my Instagram posts with Chris and grew jealous. I was trapped, and there was little I could do. I returned home feeling defeated, but what was even more surprising was that Chris asked for a break. He moved out of the house and we didn't communicate for 2 months. It was a miserable period for me, but my daughter brought some solace. After 2 months, Chris eventually forgave me, confessing his deep love and saying he couldn't bear to lose me. I was shocked, elated, and immensely grateful because I never thought he'd come back. 2 months later, we got married with our daughter as the adorable little bride who could barely walk, haha. My life has returned to its beautiful state, and I have my husband by my side. I hope my story can inspire someone and encourage self-awareness. I was fortunate to have a husband willing to forgive me. Thank you to everyone who commented and advised me to tell my husband the truth. I can't imagine what might have happened if I hadn't. Alright, that was a fun story. Now let's move on to another exciting one. Stay tuned and let's dive in. On a somber evening in April 2015, the catastrophic 7.8 earthquake in Nepal struck, shaking the land there and deeply affecting us as medical professionals. My fiancé and I were riveted to the TV, watching the tragedy unfold. The reports were heart-wrenching, over 8,000 people had died, and hundreds of thousands were displaced. The scale of the disaster was immense, but for my fiancée, who had family from that region, the tragedy hit even closer to home. Her emotional reaction was palpable. Her deep connection to the affected area was written all over her face and in the sadness in her eyes. We had been a couple for 4 years, having first met at a volunteering event in the inner city. Our shared dedication to service brought us together, and I had proposed to her 6 months earlier. Despite our busy schedules, we dreamed of building a family together. Our mutual desire to help others was a big part of our bond, and it was her compassion and selflessness that first drew me to her. Watching her response to the news about the earthquake, her kindness and empathy were more evident than ever. As calls came in, she immediately responded, knowing people in Nepal who are now facing the earthquake's aftermath. For us, responding wasn't a question, it was a necessity. We had experience traveling internationally to help disaster victims, working with groups like Doctors Without Borders. Thinking about our next move, I recalled all the times we had volunteered together. Our shared goal to ease suffering brought us closer, and it was in these moments that I truly saw her deep compassion and genuine care for those in need. We had talked about starting a family and building a future together, but life had always pushed that dream further away. We had even thought about adopting if having our own children didn't work out. But with the Nepal earthquake crisis at hand, the need to make a difference took priority. We felt driven not just to watch but to actively help, motivated by our shared responsibility and love for humanity. Little did I realize that this would be a pivotal moment, not just for those in Nepal but also for our relationship. The gravity of the situation highlighted both her empathy and the strength of our connection, but for me, Nepal felt far away, and my commitments in the US made it hard to leave for the earthquake-affected area. I considered myself adaptable, able to live with just a backpack, yet the responsibilities I had at home felt overwhelming. While I considered going to Nepal, practicality stopped me, and I thought I had convinced my fiancé not to go either. It seemed like contributing financially was our best way to help. In the weeks after the earthquake, she was constantly on calls with people from that region. Her deep involvement and passionate discussions about the victims and their suffering showed her immense empathy. She talked about how she could provide crucial medical aid there. Listening to her, I began to feel guilty we weren't there doing all we could to help. Her dedication to making a difference made me feel a moral duty to act. Even though we had decided to help financially, her descriptions vividly illustrated the ongoing struggle and the need for physical assistance. It was clear she couldn't stop thinking about the disaster or let go of its impact. She felt she had to go to Nepal to make a direct and significant impact. I realized then that her kindness and eagerness to help weren't just what drew me to her initially, they were core parts of who she is. Her willingness to go on this selfless mission filled me with pride for the woman I was engaged to. This was a new situation in our 4-year relationship. My fiancé was preparing to go on a mission without me. Had my responsibilities in the US not been a barrier, I would have gladly accompanied her. It was only after I supported her decision that I truly understood how deeply she wanted to go. She quickly prepared for her trip, even leaving behind several essentials. I suggested waiting for some items we had ordered online, but her urge to help was too strong to consider any delays. Just 2 weeks after the earthquake, she surprised me by booking a flight to Nepal. Her commitment to making a difference and bringing hope to those in need was her primary motivation. Watching her pack, I was struck by her selflessness and dedication to easing others' suffering despite the personal risks involved. Once in Nepal, the realities of her rushed departure became evident. She frequently mentioned missing certain items, regretting her hasty exit. I tried reminding her of the importance of patience and waiting for the items we had ordered, but the immediate needs of the situation seemed to overwhelm her. Her mixed heritage and family ties to the region made her quite noticeable in Nepal, which worried me. Her visibility raised my concerns about her safety and the possibility of her becoming a target. Supporting her journey financially was a significant commitment, and I was there to provide the necessary resources. Our daily phone calls became a crucial link, bridging the distance between us. She would tell me about the people she helped, focusing on supporting the hospital and medical staff. For safety, she chose to stay in a Western hotel in a more secure area. This decision somewhat eased my concerns but didn't completely eliminate my worries for her safety. As she navigated the challenges of being in a foreign country far from the comforts of our shared life, I felt a mix of pride in her altruism, concern for her well-being, and a longing for her to come home. She initially planned to be in Nepal for 2 weeks, but in hindsight, I realize our communications started to lessen over time. She ran out of money quickly, and I became her sole financial support, covering all her expenses. She never gave me any reason to doubt her, and I remained unaware of any potential issues. Her trip extended from 2 weeks to 6, requiring changes to her return flight and more supplies, all of which I funded. Amidst my busy work life, I didn't really notice our reduced communication and that her calls were increasingly about needing more financial help. While managing my busy work schedule, time passed quickly, and soon I found myself heading to the airport to welcome my fiancée back. The excitement of reuniting was undeniable, and we were both looking forward to a deep reconnect. In the following days, our intimacy took a different turn from what we were used to. Normally, I would be the initiator, but this time she led the way every time. Initially, I reasoned it was due to our long time apart. It seemed logical she had missed me, and maybe she was trying to compensate for the 6 weeks we were separated. However, something seemed off. The intimacy felt more like a chore for her rather than a genuine expression of our love. It lacked the natural, heartfelt quality we previously shared. I dismissed these concerns, thinking they were just the result of our long separation and our mutual eagerness to reconnect physically. Unbeknownst to me, there were deeper layers and hidden truths to this shift in our relationship. I accepted her newfound affection, not suspecting any hidden reasons behind it. About a month after she returned from Nepal, however, I began to feel that something was off. She was constantly on her phone, even when we were together, seeming distracted as if her mind was far away even though she was physically with me. This made me wonder if something significant had happened during her trip. The sense of discomfort stayed with me, and 2 months later, she revealed something startling: she was pregnant. I was in shock. We hadn't planned for a pregnancy, and she was supposed to be on birth control. Confused, I asked how she could have gotten pregnant. At first, she said she had forgotten to take her pill, but this didn't seem right to me. She was usually so responsible, and we always had her birth control pills delivered on time. Then her story changed. She explained that being in Nepal, seeing the earthquake's impact, and working in the hospitals made her realize she wanted to start a family. Although her explanation about wanting to start a family after her experience in Nepal was more understandable, I was troubled by the fact that she hadn't discussed such a significant decision with me. We had talked about starting a family, but for her to make this choice on her own was disconcerting. As I processed this, the dynamics of our relationship began to change. I was torn between the happiness of expecting a child and the unease about how and why she made this decision. The trust that had been the foundation of our relationship now seemed delicate, as though the tremors from Nepal had metaphorically reached us, altering the contours of our life together in unforeseen ways. When I pushed her for a more detailed reason behind her pregnancy, all she offered was an apology. This apology was telling. It indicated that something was off, and my gut feeling was that there was more to this story. With suspicions growing, I realized I needed to find out the full truth of this unexpected turn of events. When she left her phone unattended to shower, I saw a chance to find out more. She often used WhatsApp to talk to her family overseas, so I quickly linked her WhatsApp to my laptop using the QR code. The discoveries I made were astonishing. In Nepal, she had started a romantic relationship with a local man. Their messages were full of love, and they shared non-explicit photos of their time together. It was clear they were having an affair, though she seemed to struggle with the decision, possibly because of safety worries or realizing it was just a fantasy. To add to the shock, she had been sending him money, and it turned out that some of the funds I had given her for her trip were being used to support him. This betrayal weighed heavily on me, leaving me reeling with a mix of anger, hurt, and deep disappointment. The trust that had been the core of our relationship was now shattered, and the impact of our actions brought us to a junction in our lives that I had never anticipated. Processing all the information and understanding the full scope of what happened took me a couple of days. As I connected the dots, the picture became clearer, including her post-trip behavior, the newfound warmth, and the shocking disclosure of her affair. The pieces of the puzzle started to fit, except for one question: why did she decide to get pregnant? Then it hit me. Maybe during the affair, she neglected birth control, possibly because she hadn't intended to be unfaithful initially. With this realization, I confronted her, laying out all the evidence and the timeline of events. She was visibly shaken, repeating, "Oh my God," over and over. I asked her how long she had planned to keep up this charade, and she confessed she didn't have a clear answer. She admitted to getting caught up in the moment, failing to think about the ramifications of her actions. Her shock grew when I firmly stated that I couldn't accept what had happened. She was astounded by the idea that I might leave her for having an affair and being pregnant with another man's child. In her misguided thinking, she assumed I would stay because of the unborn child, almost equating it to the adoption we had once considered. She seemed unable to understand the significant difference between going on a trip, having an affair, risking my health with unprotected sex, and coming back pregnant by another man. The seriousness of her actions briefly made me wonder if the child could be mine, but this thought vanished once the full truth emerged. Our trust was shattered, leaving us both at a crucial juncture, confronting a situation we never imagined. In her distorted view, she saw the affair as a minor mistake and thought we should raise the child together. I was astounded by her reaction when I decided to leave. Despite her pregnancy, she became angry, feeling I had betrayed her. It was an unreal scenario where she saw herself as the victim in the midst of her own betrayal. When I found out about her affair, most of our family and friends were already aware of her pregnancy and believed I was the father. However, once I asked her to leave, the story changed, and I was suddenly seen as the bad guy. People criticized me for being cruel to a pregnant woman, not realizing the child wasn't mine. The expectation to man up confused me. What did that even mean in this context? It was important for her to deal with the consequences of her actions, and responsibility should be on the man who fathered the child. Faced with our friends' biased views, I decided to distance myself from them, understanding they couldn't grasp the full extent of what happened. Thankfully, my family stood by me even though they had affection for her. Following our confrontation, she couldn't really explain why she did what she did. She said she still loved me, but those words seemed empty after such a deep betrayal. To me, love didn't include deceit and causing pain. My dad pointed out that this was an important lesson and reminded me that we weren't married yet, which made ending the relationship somewhat simpler. After we split up, she held on to the belief that I might reconsider and get back together with her. When she finally understood that wasn't going to happen, she tried to hurt my career by sending messages to some of my colleagues. Luckily, most of them recognized her deceit and stood by me. This whole ordeal has been incredibly tough. I did love her, and in some ways, I still do. It's been a traumatic experience. I never thought it was possible to love someone so much and then be betrayed so terribly. This betrayal has made me wary, and I've been hesitant to get into another serious relationship since. The emotional scars from this are deep, and I know that healing will take time.